put us. I, let's see. I'm like a little bit getting used to restream, but let's see. I think we should be live. Yeah, we are live. What's up, people?
I'm gonna go to Twitch and see if we're popping up.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're there. Oh, I can hear myself. I should mute that other computer. Cool. All right. So, yeah. Well, appreciate you taking the time to come on. I didn't know if you had been on previous Star Wars podcasts, but for the last year, when we were starting to have guests on, I was meaning to message you about it because I figured you'd be interested. It just hadn't gotten around to it. So.
Oh yeah, I'm so excited, man. Obviously, I want to try and make it more of a thing. I noticed that the Star Wars community is growing, which I find to be kind of fascinating. The idea that the Skywalker saga is over, yet Star Wars seems to be growing more than ever. I know you guys are probably not into TikTok at all, and neither am I. But when I do scroll on there, I am shocked to see how many kids, I'm talking like 11-year-olds, are doing Star Wars TikToks. And it's like, wow, like kids are being introduced to Star Wars now. It's cool.
I downloaded TikTok and instantly regretted it and uninstalled it a day later. So that was the pretty crazy of my TikToking.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of it's bottom of the barrel, like quality content, but I did not know there was like a Star Wars micro fandom on there.
It's pretty big. At least that's kind of what my For You page is. It's just all Star Wars like memes and jokes. And again, like TikTok is run by 13-year-olds, so it's usually 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds. But they're pretty funny. Like some of those kids are actually really funny and really into Star Wars.
All right, maybe I'll reinstall and give it a check out. Yeah. But yeah, welcome to everyone, the few people watching live. But welcome to another episode of Loose Cannon. I am Alex Lowe, here this week with Chris Higgins.
Hey guys, glad to be here.
You can say hi, Chris. It's allowed this time. We'll let you out of your cave.
I try not to be, I get yelled at every now and then when I try to be too talkative in my introduction, but here I go again.
Yep, now stop. But we also have a guest this week. We've got Ace Cabrera, First Cut YouTube channel, the Meaning of podcast. Welcome on, Andres.
Hey, thank you for having me, man. I'm excited.
Yeah, and the topic we're tackling this week is, well, I can let you explain it a little better, but we're talking lightsaber duels, which for our longtime listeners, we've had an episode about the color of lightsabers, and we've had episodes about choreography involved, but this is really getting deep into the different forms of lightsaber battles, and the different types of fighting. So we wanted to bring in a true expert because Chris and I don't really know a damn thing about any of that, right, Chris?
I know a lot, but I'm going to be modest here and say I don't know too much.
Yeah, I was going to say Chris might know more than I do. I mean, this was something that as a kid, I loved martial arts movies and just martial arts in general. I still love martial arts. I mean, I follow MMA religiously. So my favorite aspect of Star Wars was usually the lightsaber battles and finding out that there was actual Jedi martial arts as a kid was like the coolest thing ever. So I remember as a kid, I would go through the forums of every lightsaber style and see which Jedi uses which, almost as if it's like a mixed martial arts type of thing where everyone is an expert in one specific form of martial arts. It's one of my favorite parts of like the Jedi training aspect is the idea that these guys are not just force power wizards, but they're actual martial artists.
And that was our episode a couple weeks ago. We just did an episode on Jedi training, kind of all aspects of it. And we talked a lot about the age requirements with it. And it's funny because watching some of the saber battles, it almost reminds me of ballet in a way, especially with the way the prequel trilogies handled the battles. It looks like a ballet. And when you think about ballerinas, I don't know because I didn't train in classical ballet or anything, but I feel like they all get kind of sniped at a young age to start their ballerina training. So maybe that relates somehow.
Well, a lot of that has to do too with the idea of choreography in Hollywood. It's if you know, for example, Sofia Boutella is an actress who's a dancer, but she also does action movies. And she said that her dancing ballerina background kind of helped her do the action scenes because they're taught in a very similar fashion. So martial arts choreography in Hollywood is very similar to choreography in dancing. So that might be a part of it as well.
Feel you. Now, I'm going to jump back a second because I feel like we're getting fully into the topic. And one thing we like to do with some of our guests is touch a little bit on your history with Star Wars and the movies. Now, you're of an age where you were coming up with the prequel trilogies. Was that your first intro? How do you feel about the prequel trilogies? And how has your relationship with Star Wars changed over the years?
Yeah, no. So my intro was the 1996 VHS re-releases. That I believe it was 96. But basically, they re-released the original trilogy leading up to the prequels. It was kind of George Lucas's way of introducing it to a new generation, which was my generation, the 1996 generation. And then in 1999, when Phantom Menace came out, I was 8 years old, and that was my first ever midnight premiere full Star Wars experience. Everyone was dressed up. I was going crazy. Phantom Menace like means a lot to me because of that. And honestly, I love the prequels.
There we go.
Yeah, I adore the prequels. I think they're great. And if obviously I was on Jedi Council for a little bit. It's a Collider show, and I notoriously was the guy who liked almost everything, if not everything. But I think I view Star Wars in a very different light, which is essentially the idea of mythology being introduced to new generations. I see Star Wars as like a generational thing, right? Where every saga trilogy is set for a certain age group. And if that age group takes the lessons and takes inspirations out of it, then to me, it's a success. That's why I like the sequel trilogy, and that's why I like the prequels, and that's why I obviously love the originals as well.
Good. So on this podcast, Chris and I are the two pro prequel ones, and the other two hosts are anti prequels. So it's a good episode to not have Patrick and Nick on.
No anti prequel in my house, man.
No. That's why we didn't let them come on this episode. Okay, I dig it. So let's get into some of the specifics about what you wanted to talk about. Walk us through some of the different forms of. I guess they are actually called the forms 1 through whatever of duels. Start at the top. What's the first one?
Yeah, so essentially form 1, I call it the basic form or the basic training form. This is the one where if you put on the helmet and the visor on top and you have a training droid with you and you try to learn to block the blasters, it's more about feeling, it's more about instinct. Form 1 it's taught to all the younglings. Essentially, it's what Luke does in A New Hope. It's what the younglings do in Attack of the Clones. It's very simple. It's more about the idea of getting your hands on a lightsaber and getting used to holding that kind of power and holding the lightness of the saber, so almost microscopic movements of your hands can sense the blasters through the Force. This is essentially how I broke it down in my head. But again, this is all coming from just the forms were developed years ago. I don't remember exactly when, but I know that this podcast is all about canon stuff. But the idea is that
loose canon. We're loosely.
Yeah. But the idea is that essentially all this stuff is taken from Legends. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not still canon. It's just this weird blending of the two that it's not canon, but it's not canon. I don't know if that makes sense, but basically all this still applies. It just hasn't been officially reconfirmed or reintroduced inside the new Star Wars canon, basically. I wanted to say that before.
Anything. No, it's we're counting all this as factual for the day. We don't need any more clarification. Carry on.
Yeah, but this is like Hogwarts, right? Where the first thing you learn is disarming. you disarm your opponent. Sorry to bring up Harry Potter. I know it's the wrong podcast.
I'm pro Harry Potter as well.
Apology accepted.
Yeah, this is basically disarming your opponent, getting their wand away from their hand, getting their blaster away from their hand. That's all the things that you learn in Form 1, which again is the most basic kind of lightsaber form.
Yeah, it is very much like, all right, kid, your job now is to survive and also not hack your own arm off or your friend's arm, because it's really hard to understand how deadly a lightsaber is when you pick it up. It's not like a sword at all, like, which would have weight. It would feel dangerous. A lightsaber literally is, it's very light, and like you said before, it's hard to actually get a good feel for it, like when you're starting out.
Yeah. There's the episode of, is it How I Met Your Mother, where Marshall carves a turkey with a lightsaber in one of his visions of the future, but then accidentally like cuts up a bunch of people because he doesn't know how to handle it. You don't want that.
Definitely not. Yeah, this is again what the younglings are taught, and it's funny because we get the entire lesson essentially inside A New Hope when he tells him, like, reach out with your feelings, try to see the blast before it happens. All those kind of things are what you're taught when you're a youngling with the lightsaber. It's really interesting, obviously, because the way that George Lucas developed the Jedi is that he wanted them to have this almost samurai vibe to them, where they're the most badass, fighters in the galaxy, but they only resort to violence when it's extremely necessary. And part of that was learning how to handle a lightsaber really quickly and really easily. That's the scene in A New Hope, again, when we first see Obi-Wan use it in the cantina. That's kind of the idea of Form 1 as well.
So if I understand correctly, and I don't want to jump us ahead too much, but it's not necessarily a linear progression from here. Like Form 1 is the first one that you're supposed to learn, but then it's not like, oh, you learn Form 2 and then you get better, Form 3 and then Form 4.
No, it's not. It's much more a style of martial arts, like judo, for example, versus Brazilian jiu-jitsu, right? So judo is more about throws and more about taking your opponent down to the ground. Brazilian jiu-jitsu is what are you going to do with your opponent when you're on the ground? Versus karate, which is much more like keeping your opponent away and trying to land shots and kicks from a distance. So these are all different styles of martial arts, each doing one different purpose.
Mm-hmm. The only thing that would be sequential about it is literally the first one you're supposed to learn. And they actually make that a requirement. You have to show mastery of that form before you're allowed to even begin your mastery of other forms. But what I've heard or what I've read is that most Jedi kind of browse through. They try to get the minimum requirement done with Form 1, and they want to move on to something else because they just don't think it's going to be the most effective.
Yeah. So, unless anyone's got anything more about Form 1, let's go to Form 2. Fill us in on what Form 2 is.
Yeah, so Form 2, the way, essentially what I have in my brackets, the way is kind of my thought process of how to break it down. I call it the footwork one because it's more about your footwork and more about finding angles. This is the most dancey one out of all of them, where you're essentially moving certain movements and it's all about finding the correct angle to disarm your opponent or take down your opponent. This is one that Count Dooku does really well, and he's kind of the master of this Form 2. And obviously Count Dooku is considered to be one of the best duelists in all of Star Wars history. So Form 2 is extremely powerful because of that reason. But again, the idea of martial arts being used inside of Star Wars is very funny because footwork is something that's crucial to obviously boxing, karate, a lot of different martial arts. So this one is more about finding an angle to take down your opponent. If you watch Clone Wars, for example, Asajj Ventress does this really well. Every time she fights Anakin, you see her kind of moving to the right, moving to the left, and then reaching out in a different angle, trying to find a way to take down the Jedi in every fight that she has. It's really well done in the Clone Wars animation, which is why I brought it up. But this one is essentially just footwork, angles, counter strikes, all that stuff really broken down in a very traditional martial arts form, which again is why Dooku masters it so well.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to take the comparison a step further to the NBA, so basically it's the JJ Redick of forms, where it's all about footwork and finding the right angles to get the shot off. Okay, I like this. I'll do an NBA comparison for all of these. So
this is the hardened one.
No. We're trying to keep it positive. So it's a JJ Redick one.
That means there's a ton of footwork then.
Yes, yeah. So I'm not bringing Harden into this. I like it. Okay, so now I'm trying to think back on Dooku's fighting. Are there any other Jedi you two can think of that had a similar, were really focused on form too?
I mentioned Asajj. Dooku is one that always comes to mind. Not sure if I can reach into Clone Wars, maybe.
One thing to keep in mind is that a lot of many different Jedis have mastered more than one form.
Yes, that's true.
So there's potentially like other Jedi that they may not be their primary form, but they actually know how to use it.
In my brief research, Kaya-Mundi was one who also practiced this, and I like bringing him up all the time because, as you learned a couple episodes ago, he was the only Jedi that was encouraged to reproduce because his species was dying off. So I like whenever we get a chance to bring up him because he was getting told to get out there and spread his seed.
My man.
That's amazing.
Yeah. All right, Chris. Any other thoughts on Form 2?
Actually, yeah. The comparison that I get excited to think about is the water dancers from Game of Thrones.
Oh,
So I think that's like a comparison to like another franchise that you can make. I'm not sure if you guys have seen.
Perfect
that.
Comparison. Yeah, that's the perfect comparison. Yeah, I'm a massive Game of Thrones guy, so I totally know what you mean. Yeah, that's perfect. I love it.
As someone who's never seen Game of Thrones, I don't think there's anything lamer you could have said than water dancers.
The great thing about what you just said is that you led off by saying to us that you haven't seen it. Because if you haven't seen Game of Thrones, as soon as the topic is brought up, you have to tell us right away that you have not seen it. So thank you.
Haven't seen Game of Thrones. I don't have Netflix. What are my other trademarks that I have to bring up?
You're missing out, man.
There's so many things to watch. Come on.
I know.
So okay. I dig it. Now, I guess Form 3, which Form 3 we come to everyone's favorite Jedi?
Oh, yeah, by far. He's my favorite, and he's my favorite character. Form 3 is all about defense, defense, defense. This is the Scottie Pippen form.
There we go.
Using your reach, angles. No, I'm playing. But for real, this is all about defense. This is the most... I would consider this the most Jedi of the forms because, again, I go back to the idea of the Jedi, of the samurai, only using your martial arts training as a form of defense and not offense. That's kind of the mentality of the Jedi, and that's what George Lucas wanted. But this one is all about protecting yourself from blasters, protecting yourself from other lightsabers, defending yourself against armies of droids, as we've seen Obi-Wan Kenobi do. This is all about defense, protecting yourself, deflecting blasters, all that kind of stuff. Everything we've seen, again, Obi-Wan do. Even if you play video games, if you play Battlefront, this is also kind of Obi-Wan style inside Battlefront 2, if you play as him as well. But again, it goes back to the Jedi mentality of only using your martial arts training to defend and not as offense. This is the Floyd Mayweather, for a boxing analogy, defensive fighter.
The Torrey Hunter, can we just take it to every sport? Richard Sherman. Now, this is the one where I feel like it's most commonly shown in the movies. I mean, I know, like Chris said earlier, a lot of different Jedi touch on a lot, but I mean, this is kind of what Vader was doing and what Luke is doing. Now, it makes sense that they're doing it because of the Obi-Wan connection, but we just see it a ton on screen where it's like, I'm going to just continue. It reminds me of old sword fighting movies where they're just like batting the sword away while talking crap the entire time without actually ever trying to go for that killing blow.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one of my favorite Star Wars books is Rule of Two, which is part of the Darth Bane trilogy. And Darth Bane's apprentice is Darth Xana, and I don't know if this is the form that she uses, but there's this really cool battle where they really go into detail describing the form that she was using and how it counteracted her opponent's form. He was a big brutish guy who would heave everything behind every single slash against her. So she had no ability to really go offensive against him. She had to parry and she had to dodge and eventually just wore him out and was able to beat him. So I feel like that's like an example of how it could be used.
Yeah, and again, this one also goes back, the idea of Obi-Wan Kenobi being the master of this form is also the idea of him, especially in the Clone Wars, using this as a way to deflect against any and all angles of blasters and defending himself in that sense, which is, I think is one of the coolest things ever by far, because it's the idea of like, no matter how many droids are attacking me, I know exactly how to literally deflect every blast that's coming at me.
Well, and then the name they give to defending all of it is the Circle of Shelter, right?
Yes.
Which I think one thing I read on this is that can stop up to 20 blasters at once. Like, just to be able to block that many through this form of defense is, you know, it's like, again, like Scotty being able to guard all 5 positions. It's incredible.
Yeah, that's the perfect analogy. Scottie Pippen's amazing. So
yeah,
Scottie Pippen and Obi-Wan, man. It's the same thing.
What if we got a Last Dance style documentary about Anakin's Jedi training?
That'd be amazing.
That would be really cool. So I think he's definitely one of the best lightsaber duelists. I think you can see that he has a mastery of like a lot of the different forms.
Just get Anakin and starting to get emotional when he's talking about how competitive he was and how he just wanted the best out of people.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's one of my favorites, obviously, because of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and because I think I mentioned this on another podcast, another Star Wars podcast, talking about the reason why Obi-Wan is my favorite is because that he's not just the wise, British guy. He's also one of the most feared, expert martial arts, powerful Jedi ever inside the Star Wars universe. And it is because of this mastery of this form. It's because he's considered to be one of the best duelists inside of Star Wars.
Yeah, you can't sleep on Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
Well, and that was one of the best parts of the prequels, in my opinion, was seeing Obi-Wan actually get to battle as opposed to just being this wise old man who, does a little bit. But seeing Ewan McGregor, and I'm just begging still before he gets too old for us to get the standalone movie with Ewan McGregor
and
between episodes 3 and 4.
Yeah, and we will. We got the announcement for that for the series. We're gonna get that for sure. Well, final thing I want to say to kind of echo your point, Alex, off that. If you think about it, the way I told my friend, he's kind of the Jedi secret weapon in the prequels. Yeah. Every mission that there is, they send Obi-Wan Kenobi. They're like, we need someone to literally take out, like kill Grievous. They're like, Obi-Wan, it's unanimous. Obi-Wan Kenobi. Oh, we need someone to take down this bounty hunter. They're like, Obi-Wan Kenobi, he's got it. He's like their secret. He's like their secret assassin, man. He's like the badass of the Jedi Council.
He really is, and he actually, because of his defeat of Darth Maul, when he literally cut him in two, the Jedi Order actually reconsidered their training regimen, because after their battle of Rusan, that was when basically the Sith were thought to be wiped out. And they said, okay, there's only like a few Sith out there, so really it's not practical that we're going to fight a Sith. So we might as well focus on other types of lightsaber forms that are more focused on defense and deflecting like blaster fire. But, after this happened and, Obi-Wan proved that it was needed, they were like, maybe we should rethink this.
Yeah.
Now, Chris, you just brought up Darth Maul.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a segue?
Well, I think you could argue he would be someone that would use Form 4.
Oh, did he ever? Ace, form 4.
Form 4. I call this one the acrobatic form. It's essentially the one where you're using the force to elevate you athletically, acrobatically, to almost make yourself more difficult to be hit by your opponent is essentially the way I thought about it. Obviously, the biggest example of this is Yoda, and you mentioned Darth Maul as well. The reason why Yoda is the best example is because Yoda's tiny, and he makes himself even harder to hit by moving so quickly and so acrobatically. And at the same time, he uses those jumps and that leverage as a way to reach his taller opponents.
So what you're saying is he's MVP season Derrick Rose.
Dude, I'm glad you went there. I was gonna say it if you didn't.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Continue. Sorry.
He goes all out in every play.
Yeah. Russell Westbrook, maybe, if we're going one more. It's Derrick Rose and Russell Westbrook.
But essentially, this is the acrobatic form using the force to elevate you physically and athletically to overwhelm your opponent by your speed and by your athleticism.
Yeah, and someone like Yoda wouldn't really stand a chance in a fight without this being able to access this form. Battling someone like Count Dooku, he was, like you said before, he was one of the most skilled duelists besides maybe Mace Windu, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, Yoda, to me, obviously, we have that line in Attack of the Clones where Obi-Wan says to Anakin, if he wasn't, I think he says, if you practice your saber techniques as much as you practice your wit, you would rival Master Yoda. And it's interesting, he says Yoda and not Windu or anyone else, but Yoda was still, he's still a badass. He can still hold his own in a lightsaber fight. So, yeah, and it's due to this form. He mastered this form.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, when you think about Yoda, if I was to get in a fist fight with a Jedi, I wouldn't be that afraid of Yoda. I would still probably be worried about Windu or Qui-Gon or any of the others. But Yoda, it was purely through his mastery of the Force and saber techniques that he became a formidable opponent. Now, what I think is really interesting is Yoda's a master of this form. Then Qui-Gon's a master of this form. But then Obi-Wan takes more of the defensive approach, even though he was in that line of apprentices.
Apprenticeship?
Yeah. Why do you guys think, any thoughts? And I don't know, I'm asking, for that shift, why did Obi-Wan kind of take more of a defensive approach as opposed to adopting this form?
I think that the forms are also a good example of the idea of personalities, right? It's like if I'm taking this form, it's almost an extension of my own personality. I think the defensive form is much more Obi-Wan's personality. And if you watch The Phantom Menace, you could see that even though he was trained by Qui-Gon and he listened to Qui-Gon, he always kind of hesitated he always questioned Qui-Gon's almost brashness. And he was always much more traditional and laid back and wanted to listen to the council. So I think it's more of Obi-Wan's personality than anything else.
Yeah, I like what you said there, because it's sort of like if you juxtapose Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan is very by the books, orthodox, and Qui-Gon is like a pragmatist, unorthodox kind of guy. And it not only is to their ideology, but also to their fighting style. And when it comes to the orthodoxy of the Jedi, they're more about, the creed is never in attack. We are always, only in defense do we use our abilities, which I think Qui-Gon would be one of the first people to question that. Whereas Obi-Wan would be thinking, no, that's exactly what we always need to be doing. I'm not going to really think about what it would be to, go against the grain.
All right, so I think it's time for maybe my second favorite Jedi to watch on screen when it comes to battles. Moving on to Form 5.
Yeah, Form 5. So this one, again, this is my names for it. I call this the power form. This is much more about using your strength and your physical power to overwhelm your opponent. Obviously, one of the things highlighted as far as techniques is the falling avalanche, which Wikipedia describes as an overhand power blow, and you use it with incredible force. This is the form that Anakin mastered, and we see that throughout the prequels, actually, especially in Revenge of the Sith, when he's trying every strike is very powerful, and you could see an advantage with the force in every single one of his strikes as well. It's very technical, it's very much power driven. It's slightly rage driven, but not too much, not as much as other forms. But this one is much more the power form, trying to use your actual physical presence and actually using the force as well.
Now, can you pronounce, because I certainly can't, can you pronounce the Star Wars name for this?
Oh, man. So Xian Jimso?
Sure. Yeah.
Something like that?
I think that's what it is.
That's much better than I could have done. I was just wondering how those are possibly said, if either of you had ever heard that said out loud, because I haven't.
Yeah, I'd heard it said out loud. I think you nailed it.
There you go.
That's why we brought you on board for this episode. No, yeah, I mean, this is the one that reminds me the most of the kind of stuff you would see at medieval times or something. Just going in with pure power, if you wanted to call it the Zion Williamson.
Ooh, I was going to say the Brienne of Tarth.
Yeah.
No? Chris? No?
For this, yeah, she's more of a slower, methodical fighter. But she... I mean, we did see her get outdueled by the I'm sorry, which Stark was it?
Arya.
They were pretty even, but yeah, I like the comparison though. I just think this is such a cool form. I think it might be my favorite.
Well, you're a big other name I can't pronounce from the Clone Wars, Chris. Now I'm really doing my credence as a Star Wars expert here.
Which one?
Our whole last episode, Chris, help me out.
Dude.
And maybe edit this out.
Is it Kiadi?
No. Ashoka.
Oh,
Ahsoka
Ahsoka.
Tano.
Yeah, wasn't this her form?
I believe so. Yeah, I think this is her main form, and the fact that she was trained by Anakin.
Yep.
Who could better teach it?
Exactly. I am un-Clone Wars initiated, so.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So that's on the top of the list. But Chris is the Clone Wars expert here.
Yeah, but it's kind of I like the form because it's really representative of a specific period of the Clone Wars. I don't know. I think when we talked about the chronology of this, I think what it is I think it's they're numbered in order of when they were actually established. I could be wrong, but I think that's how they're ordered, which would explain why Anakin is such a why his name is really affiliated with it. I think he was someone that really pushed it forward, and like I think he was definitely maybe the best user of it in the history of the Jedi. And there's actually like old holocrons that Ahsoka would watch post Clone Wars of Anakin explaining how to use this form, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, Anakin is obviously considered one of the greatest Jedi and one of the most powerful Jedi of all time. So this is like right up his lane.
Mm-hmm.
Now, two notes that are a slight tangent here. One, Nick remotely has brought in the fact that my point about punching Yoda in the face isn't valid because Yoda's safe from fistfights because it would feel too icky to punch him in the face. Valid point. Thank you, Nick. Yeah, that is why all the lightsaber battles go. But that does bring us to our stupid Wikipedia entry of the week. Chris, insert theme music. We'll pretend it's there. The start of the Wikipedia entry for lightsaber combat reads, lightsaber combat occurred when two or more opponents using lightsabers, or at least one of the combatants used a lightsaber while the other used a different bladed weapon, engaged in a duel. And I love that whoever felt the need to write this Wikipedia article had to put that there are two or more people using this because you can't have a lightsaber duel on your own. There is no sitting at home with a lightsaber late at night and having a duel. So, yeah, one of the... No. It's just a solo lightsaber battle. So stupid Wikipedia entry of the week. The first paragraph of lightsaber combat. Thank you very much.
It reminds me, actually, I go back to that scene in Attack of the Clones when Anakin says, "I thought I already did." Rival Master Yoda, and he says, "Only in your mind, my very young apprentice." He didn't actually have the duel, only in his mind.
Late at night, sitting at home alone.
Late at night, he beat Yoda in his head.
Now, you brought up the falling avalanche a little bit there, but that I think is like the coolest name for an attack. And that feels like something that could translate across all content. I mean, that's a name that could work for a Lord of the Rings attack. I feel like I would have learned that in the old Return of the King game on PS2, or no, I'm sure in the Game of Thrones or whatever that
or whatever
that they would have had something like that. I don't think there's a cooler move to watch than when he's coming with two hands from above with the lightsaber, which for all the podcast listeners, I just demonstrated, and I'm sure it looked really cool.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's one of those things, too, where if you even think back to Return of the Jedi, when Luke goes basically ham on Darth Vader and just starts hitting him with haymakers, you think of that as like, oh, wow, that's kind of him going hard as he can. Obviously, it's him embracing the dark side as well. But I don't know. That's what it reminds me of as well.
I also don't feel bad about forgetting Ashoka's name now after you forgot Luke's name there for half a second.
Yeah.
I feel much better. The main guy. All right, so let's move along. We got a few more forms. Form 6.
Yeah, Form 6. I called this one the Force Power technique. This one is a lot more rage centered, which is why, again, one of the best people that we know who did this one was Sidious. We see this in Revenge of the Sith. But essentially, it's using the Force in a much more well-rounded kind of way, embracing the rage, embracing the power, and using even like telekinetic vibes and telekinetic energy to pull your opponent, to push your opponent, to grab objects, to throw objects. Everything that we see Sidious do in Revenge of the Sith, we see obviously Darth Vader do that as well in Empire Strikes Back when he starts throwing stuff at Luke Skywalker. But this one is, it's not necessarily a Sith form, but the best example I can think of is a Sith.
So it's more of a form of controlling things without directly attacking in the same way. So it's the Rajan Rondo form.
Yeah.
Cool.
Disappearing form.
I'm coming up with these on the spot, and I can guarantee 99% of listeners probably don't know who Rajan Rondo is.
No.
I don't think we have the biggest crossover between our listeners and early 2010 Celtics fans, but
or current Lakers fans who think they're going to win a championship.
They're not.
Or Bulls fans.
It's hard to win a championship when you're the second best team in your city. Yeah, okay. Now, the one of these I would always use. I love this form when it came to playing Star Wars Battlefront 2, because you have the move where you can force pull someone to you, and then while they're out of control, slice them. That's just like an unstoppable move.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think, does Kylo do that in Rise of Skywalker? Or am I imagining that in the beginning on Mustafar? I think he does, yeah. When he pulled the Alizmec and he slashes him in the stomach.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely seems like a Kylo move.
It seems like something he might do.
Yeah, he definitely would do that, you know?
That jerk. No, I mean, anything where you're moving someone with the Force is way cooler to me, and it always was as a kid, than just like being able to know where blasters are going and deflect them. That's cool, whatever. I can see a world where I could hit a bullet with a sword. I don't see a world where I could pull someone into me or push someone aside. That was just like the ultimate power to 8-year-old me when I was watching the prequels.
Yeah.
To be honest, though, this form seems pretty underpowered. I mean, the form before this was like you get the best of everything. You can deflect blasters, you can parry, you can use the falling avalanche and just annihilate people. And this one is like you can use the force to pull people towards you. You're kind of a lazy force user battler.
Yeah. Yeah, again,
I
this
don't
is
want to
all
go over there. I'm not going to run after you, which is what
Yeah.
Vader is doing most because he never runs. He's walking around.
I mean, think about Sidious. He's also kind of old.
Yeah. After a while, he's like, dude, I can't. This old lightsaber thing is, who even needs it? In his older age.
All right. Well, Form 7, which I believe is the final form.
Form 7. Yeah. Form 7 is one of my favorites, mainly because of who uses it and mainly because of how much I love this character. But I think about this form as like you're fully using every aspect of the force to power you. Think of it almost like a Super Saiyan. I don't know if you guys watch Dragon Ball Z.
Oh, I do.
There you go. But like you're a Super Saiyan, right? You're using that energy and that power inside the force to fully use it as a martial art. The biggest user obviously is Mace Windu. And it's slightly, again, this is not quite canon, which a lot of people are going to debate, but it's the idea of Mace Windu using this form because Mace Windu was able to not get swayed by the dark side, even though he was using such a dark form. It's not quite dark, but it's much more the amplification of full offense going at it 100%. And that's why it's considered to be a little bit darker than the other forms, even though Mace Windu was considered to be the master of it. And Mace Windu, in my opinion, is the best of them all. I think he can take that on anyone. And I consider him to be the best lightsaber duelist of all time.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong
Jordan
on this. No.
We're going to make a last dance about Mace Windu.
Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but he was the founder of this form, right? Like no one really used it before him.
He created it, yeah.
He made it safe for the Jedi to use, kind of, even though no one was really allowed to use it besides Mace Windu. He just made it so that it could be altered so that it could be used by a Jedi without going into being tempted by the dark side completely.
Yes. And again, this is how he can beat Sidious like nothing in Revenge of the Sith. It's the idea of him using this form, and it's the idea of him being able to counter a full-powered Sith at the level of Sidious or Palpatine, whatever you want to call him. It's the idea.
We call him Sheev on this show.
Or Sheev. I call him Palpatine, but Sidious is his, Sith name. But either way, it's the idea of Mace using this incredibly powerful form to take down Palpatine.
So I regret earlier saying Derrick Rose or Russell Westbrook for the earlier form because I feel like this is the Russell Westbrook form.
Yeah.
It's power, it's speed. I guess if I've already used up Westbrook, I could go with Giannis, but I feel like the speed aspect really brings in Westbrook
Giannis,
better.
He's working on his three-pointers, man.
And it's also
go from far away.
I feel like Russell Westbrook is angry.
Yeah, this is perfect Russell Westbrook. I mean, Russell Westbrook is Mace Windu.
One thing that's also interesting about this form is that they actually it becomes more, what's the word I'm looking for? It gets increased in power when they actually are, because you cannot use this form without becoming enthralled by the battle itself and crushing the opponent. And that feeling is actually something that has to be utilized while using the form. And actually, it does utilize anger, but it's not the user's anger that Mace Windu used. He actually uses, he kind of absorbs or kind of uses the anger of his opponent and then is able to transfer it back against them, which is like kind of crazy if you think about it. So it's how he's able to kind of tap into it, not even by using his own anger, but by using his opponents to like lead, go into the attack.
Yeah, and it's almost like you get that as well from the idea of him. Obviously, this is something that everyone has done now, but the idea of him transferring that force lightning back at Palpatine, it is almost the idea too, where he's like, transferring his own energy of his opponent against them. And he does that with the lightsaber. But then again, that's the same thought process of what Mace Windu was doing inside this fight. Was almost like transferring that negative energy right back at you.
Yeah, he deflected it.
Yeah.
Literally. But it's also another question. I have this on my very small notes. This is a question. It's a little off topic, but it's been a monkey on my back for a long time, and I'm just hoping that either of you can answer it for me. I'm not convinced that Sidious lost that battle. I mean, I think he tossed it. I think he lost on purpose.
He was tanking.
I think he tanked.
He was the Sam Hinkie of Jedi.
Because he was hoping to get a first-round pick with Anakin, and he had to tank.
This has been an endless debate since Revenge of the Sith, since 2005, and I am on the opposite side of that fence when it comes to this debate. Because again, a lot of my friends were like, "Dude, no, he gave him the win. He tanked on purpose," and I'm convinced that he didn't. I'm convinced that he lost to Mace, like fully lost, got his ass kicked. Because the reason why is because I think it would have been a little bit. I think it's easier for him to get rid of Mace Windu and then focus on Anakin. But I think this was just another wrinkle in his plan. There's a few moments where Palpatine's plan doesn't go exactly as he wanted. It happens in The Phantom Menace with Padme, where he's like, okay, this isn't quite what I wanted for her to do, but I'll work with it. And then I think this is another moment when it happens when he's like, oh crap, I'm facing off against someone who's better than me with Mace Windu. But that's just my opinion. I don't know. Maybe he did.
What do you think? And then I want to throw mine out there as well.
So I think I am of the camp that the Emperor did toss it. I think he let Windu beat him, but I think Windu was capable of beating him. So I don't think it was necessarily he would have struck down Windu if he wanted to, but I think there's a moment when he gives up in there.
I think
that's what I see in his eyes.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting wrinkle. I'm just not convinced because he totally tore through 2 or 3 other masters in literally less in seconds. And then because they weren't important. Remember, Mace Windu is an important figure in the plot and also with Anakin, and it's sort of the Emperor needed to pin Mace Windu against him and contrasting with Sheev, because if he had just shown up and like Palpatine had killed everyone, Anakin's just going to be like, oh my God, you just murdered 3 Jedis. But he needed to make Mace Windu look like the bad guy because obviously Mace was going to say, we need to kill him. That's why I think, because think about it, everything that was happening was all productive. It would not have been productive for him to have killed 3 Jedi and then have Anakin show up, because how would he have gotten the sympathy? How would he have painted himself as a victim if that was the case? Because he needed to be a victim in this situation in order to prove to Anakin that the Jedi were corrupt, which he had been kind of pointing towards.
Yeah, if I counter that, I could say maybe he would be like, hey, look what happened, man. They went after me. They attacked me. I mean, that's how he would sell it. That's how he did sell it to the Senate. Either way, they tried to kill me. I don't know. I think there's just a few moments in the fight where he just looks overwhelmed and he just looks like he's out of his game, where he's like, oh, crap, Mace is actually better than me. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell Anakin. And I feel like he's just really good at improvising, which again is what he does in The Phantom Menace and what he does throughout the entire prequel trilogy. When Padme kind of goes back to Naboo and does her own thing and basically kills Darth Maul. I don't know. To me, this is always like Mace's moment where he's like, dude, I'm the best. I'm killing it. And he would have killed Palpatine if Anakin didn't come in there.
I'll concede the fact that I think he was that he was a better duelist. Overall, though, as a Force user, I'm thinking that would have gotten the better of. I think Palpatine's Force abilities would have gotten the better of him at the end, but I do think that in terms of just dueling, I think Mace is the better. So I will say that.
So what you're saying is he's the Colin Mockery of Star Wars. He's a very good improvist. That was a Who's Line reference, everyone. A Who's Line reference. Thank you. All right, Chris, I think you had a couple more questions. Do you want to bring either of those up before we wrap up?
Yeah, so one of the best I think we have to agree, one of the best lightsaber
I
duelists.
don't agree at all.
You will soon. One of the
Okay.
best lightsaber duelists in the galaxy was actually Finn, because he was able to outduel Kylo Ren. So my question is, what form? What do you guys think he was using? Because obviously you'd have to be using a pretty powerful form to defeat, almost defeat Kylo Ren. What do you guys think?
I wouldn't say he almost defeated him. That's an interesting question, right? Because obviously, in retrospect, we can think back to the idea of Finn being somehow connected to the Force. Now that we've seen Rise of Skywalker,
Don't tell that to
um,
Al.
at least a slight connection there.
Hmm.
I don't know, man. I mean, he seems pretty offensive with every one of his moves. Maybe Form 5.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say like a Form 5, but you don't really know what you're doing. It's
Okay.
like the difference between Zion Williamson, who has all that